Greetings, students. This is Dr. Clements, and today we're going to talk about how to answer a short answer question. This type of question is on all the exams and all the online classes deal with this. So this is something that all my students struggle with. The key thing to understand is a short answer question is really different from identification. An identification usually is just asking about a specific person. And the short answer question may be similar to the identifications about maybe an event, but basically it's asking about a specific topic that requires deeper thought and a better understanding of the chapter as a whole. So you're going to have to put a little more time looking at the chapter than you probably would with an identification question. And your responses for a short answer question are going to be standalone paragraphs, much like your IDs, that you're going to have to really kind of think about how to sculpt it as a paragraph type response. And to enter them, you just have to basically invest a little more time. I would suggest not writing more in this one paragraph than 10 to 15 sentences. Now you'll notice there's probably a couple sentences more than I suggested you could use in your identifications. So another key thing to understand is the short answer questions are not essays. You do not respond to me like an essay question. And essays in my class have 5 paragraphs. In a short answer question, you're just writing 1 paragraph. So remember, it's not an essay. Unfortunately, in high schools, they tell students that a short answer question response, which is a paragraph, is an essay, and it's not. And so sometimes that creates confusion. So I want you to understand that. Now, there's a lot of data here, so we want to go through this a little slower here. Points to consider while working on this is read the question prior to reading the chapter. If I usually give you a study guide or give you some other material or give you a weekly assignment, read those questions before you try to read the chapter at all. This will help you locate the material as you go through it. Specifically, if I'm asking you a question that involves you looking at several different several different points of the chapter as you go through it. That way you can take some notes as you work through. Next, look carefully at what the question is actually asking. It might help to read it several times, or you might even print it out and underline key terms. Or if you're taking some notes, just jot down some key terms right beside it. The key thing is make sure you're answering the question presented to you. And that's where this first point about looking very carefully at the terms and what I'm asking you is going to be very important. Here in a little bit, I'll have some examples of some short answer question types for you. Next, does the question have multiple parts to it? If so, be sure you answer each part. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is. I'll get a student, they'll do really well, but only answer half the question. And, what does that do to me as the instructor is I have to take points off. Even though you did really well on half, you didn't answer the other half. All right, note keywords. Be sure to use them in your response, just like we talked about in identification videos. If you watch that one, use the keywords in the chapters you're reading. Next, like identification questions, you're hitting the who, what, when, where, and why is this important. And just like those other ones, examples are critical here too. Statistics also help here. We'll be looking at an example here in a bit, talking about why it's good and why it's bad. And when you're at the end of your response, read the question again. Make sure, did I answer it? Make that way keeps you from accidentally missing something. So let's look at a good example here. This is a very short question. Explain the meaning of Reaganomics. Now, this is a short question, but unfortunately, Reaganomics is a little more complicated. This presentation is not as long as the identification one, so I'm actually going to read this to you. So let's look at it. The term Reaganomics was used to refer to the economic program under President Reagan from 1981 to 1989. Notice no full identification. There's a mistake there. The media developed, that's the last mistake I'll mention because there's some more on the next slide. I don't think this one was mentioned. The media developed this term. In Reagan's program, he believed that United States capitalism would achieve greater productivity if it were allowed to function independently. It tells us he's going to be a pretty hands-off guy, right? This would occur by freeing it from things like government regulation and heavy taxation. The first proposal by Reagan involved a 30% reduction statistics in federal income taxes over the course of 3 years. Congress voted on this, but reduced the cut to 25%. Another stat, great. Also, Reagan proposed other major cuts, and Congress agreed and passed many of these reductions, but reduced them some before they were passed. Anytime Reagan was president, more than $40 billion of domestic spending was cut down, which was less than Reagan had proposed. Okay, another stat. That's good. There was also a major reduction in federal regulations of businesses through Reaganomics. Okay, so let's look at this. What's good, what's bad? What was good? They used major terms from the question. That's good. They used dates. Great. Stats at least 3 times. Solid explanation of the process and points of it. And what was lacking? The only negative in this entry was the last sentence is vague. It would help to give an example. So let's go back and look at this. Last sentence. There are also major reductions. What are those reductions? Okay, that would be great. So, such as, you can just put such as blank and then come back to the sentence. Now, there's another little part up here. Congress agreed and passed many of these reductions, but reduced them some before. It's not as big an issue, I think, as this one here, because you're kind of already dealing with these 2 stats here. But this one really stood out when I read it. But everything else is great. So, you're probably only looking at a point mistake here, because as I mentioned in the identification one, I tend to put example -1 a lot on papers because people will not completely discuss something, and they really need to. So, let's look at some sample questions here. First one, describe the poverty point culture and why did it collapse? Well, it's a 2-part question, so you need to give me a description of the culture and then tell me why it collapsed. So, a lot of times people just talk about it and never tell me why it collapsed, or they'll talk about the collapse and never describe the culture. So you got to watch out. Incidentally, several of these are Arkansas history or U.S. Questions, but you'll see similar structures regardless of what class you're taking. Okay, next, number 2, what is the difference between archaic and Mississippi and Native American groups? So this is a compare and contrast question. The big mistakes that a lot of people make here is they'll mention one side and not really discuss the other very much. And so my general rule for you is this. If you talk about land use in one group, you better tell me about land use in the other group. All right? So food, land, religion, whatever it is you're discussing, which are all critical in this particular answer if you're in Arkansas history, have to be used there. Number 3. Why was Arkansas considered a less than desirable place to live during the early statehood period? Discuss the reasons for this image problem. Now, this is a good one. You got your question. Now, a lot of students will only discuss one thing. Notice the S. I put it in highlights for you, because that tells you have to have multiple examples. Don't just give me one thing. Is it religion? Now, most people talk about religion in this particular case, a lack of it. Well, there are other things that are discussed in the textbook. Next one, same thing. Which points in Hamilton's economic program were the most controversial? So a lot of students are only going to focus on the whiskey tax or something like that. But it says points. I want to see multiples. Number 5, very complicated question. And it's an important big chunk of the chapter. So it should be pretty easy for you to find, you would think. But unfortunately, a lot of students do not do a good job of answering it. Analyze unique qualities of the 1824 election. All right, so why is it going to be unique? That's something you're going to have to discuss while you're working this other material in. Who were the major candidates? And, it's going to be a trick. It's not just 2 people in this one. What were the major issues? Okay, I highlighted what and issues. So there's more than one. What was the campaign like? And then how did the president actually get selected? So you're probably going to be thinking about a couple, 3 sentences maybe, looking at these issues in each of these individual points. So this is going to be a little longer one perhaps than, let's say, if you're answering this question up here, which it actually has 2 parts, but this one actually has multiple parts. So it's a little more than 2, so it's a little more complicated. So pay attention to the wording is extremely important. So read the general writing deductions list. It's very important. You can find it in the How to Answer Questions document in your class. Here is where you'll find information that will be extremely helpful to you in avoiding those grammar mistakes that I keep talking to you about. Next, this list alerts you to those common mistakes, as it says down here, which is kind of repeating myself. So, feedback. I make every effort to provide feedback in each paper, whether it's a class exam you take or an online paper turned in. If I go to the trouble to mark something, that means it's important and you need to avoid doing it again. So when you get your paper back, please read my comments carefully. Now, if I'm constantly marking the same things over and over and over again, stop it. Usually because that's telling you need to improve as you're going to go on in your academic career. I want you to realize that there are some things that are not going to be acceptable in the future when you're writing, and you need to get rid of them now. Stomp it out now and make your life a little easier. Because when you're taking those senior level classes, they're going to be in trouble. I knew a fellow who got the equivalent of a failing grade in a doctoral class because he had one dangling participle on a paper. So, if you're planning on going, far ahead in academics, you got to pay attention to some of these things. And so the key to improving is not making the same mistakes again. Learn from your mistakes, go forward, and do a better job next time. Well, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Here's my email address, or you can call my office. The number and extension are near the top of the syllabus. Hope you guys have a good day. Bye.